Thank you very much. Firstly, Selvin, really pleased to be able to moderate this. I think it's a privilege to thank you for that. And also Gareth for inviting me. And I know you're doing some excellent work in the city around the concept of resilience, which I think coming from the work I do in Africa, broadly, the rest of Africa, I think the resilience work that you're doing is pioneering. So would encourage the people that continue to support the city to continue to do that, because I think it's fundamental to how we think about our future. There isn't enough resilience thinking going on. And when I used to run the Policy Futures unit in WWF, this was topmost on our thinking, because we tend to always look at problems and never look at opportunities and the ability to adapt and become more resilient. And I think just also for the audience, just to share that, I think the works that I found really inspiring is that of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And I think one area that I think could complement the work that you're doing, Gareth, is to think about resilience in relationship to a concept that he is busy promoting, which is about anti-fragility. It's how systems actually are able to bounce back better than they were before. It's really fundamental to this. And it's about long-run ability to withstand long-run shocks. Pandemics are one of them. I think you should have a session of the lessons around pandemics and so on. But I think just to, before I kick off and introduce the speakers, just to ask also Selvin if we have opportunity for the audience to interact, if they were to raise their hands, because I'm not sure if we've clarified that, if that's okay.
That's fine. It's entirely how we'd like to run the session. Okay. But the audience also more than welcome to put a note in the chat, and we can pick it up from there as well. Okay.
So we'll have two ways. The one way is for the audience to put questions on the chat or to make comments, and the other is just to raise your hand. Then in terms of the approach we're going to take into looking at the specific topic about under the umbrella of the futurecasting, particularly around energy resilience. And I think it's a very timely conversation. There's a lot happening in the space nationally and within the city. I think lots of the audience here are very eager to understand what's going on. We have really good 4 speakers who are at the top of understanding these issues. I'll just briefly say say who the speakers are. Their bios are actually on the website of the EDP. So I don't want to go into too much details about each of them. I think the first speaker would be really Leila Weideman. She's a director of sustainable energy markets. Also important to recognize that Leila has come a long way. She's worked in this sector and particularly for energy companies for many years and knows the topic quite well. And I think that what the city is doing in setting up a sustainable energy section and directorate is really exciting space, and she will cover the work of the city. Each speaker has about 10 minutes. I will put my camera off, and then when I put my camera on, there's 1 minute left. So just to prod you to rather just focus on the main points. Sometimes less is more. And then we have Louise Scholtz, who's a senior program manager at the WFSA. She's, I think, the head of urban programs now. And then we've got Karin Kritzinger, senior researcher at the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy. And then Bruce Raw, chief strategy officer for GreenCape. Funnily, I have had a career with all 3 of these organizations. So I know them intimately. So if I don't want to do too much talking. I think the audience wants to listen to the speakers. So I'm going to invite Leila to come and say a few opening remarks. And Leila, if I can hand the floor over to you, and then I'll ask Louise and and Karin and so on. And then we'll take Q&As after that, if that's okay. I will ask some questions, but I'll also get the audience to engage with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Saliem and Salwan. There's so much that can be said on this topic, as Saliem said. It was difficult to try and keep my thoughts within 10 minutes. So I'm going to rush through some ideas, and then hopefully you can ask some questions afterwards. We can go into some detail. I wanted to maybe first kick off by reading an extract from our business plan from 2018, because I think this sets the context for and captures the issues very well that we are trying to overcome in order to become more resilient and sustainable. And it says the challenges facing the electricity distribution industry in South Africa and the changing energy landscape globally to a decentralized and increasingly unbundled, market-driven, distributed energy system means that an alternative business model for local government utilities needs to be explored and established. The city has to increasingly deal with the challenges of reduction in electricity sales, customer retention, increasing tariffs over CPIX and customers' ability to pay, cities' growth in subsidized services, electricity bulk supply constraints resulting in load shedding, challenges associated with carbon emission targets and our climate crisis, and then finally, the impact of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and new technologies on existing systems and models. So what are we doing as a city? In addition to energy efficiency, demand side management, and investigating options to deal with energy poverty, the city is also looking at diversifying its supply to meet its carbon neutral 2050 goal, and particularly in light of our national utility not providing a reliable electricity supply based on sustainable sources. So our 5 interventions in terms of project implementation is the first one, developing our own renewable energy assets, and we're starting with a project in Atlantis, a 10 megawatt project. We're hoping over the next 10 years to potentially build out 50 megawatts of renewable energy, either PV or waste to energy. And we must keep in mind that 50 megawatts of solar, which has about 28% capacity factor, is only about 1% of our energy purchases from Eskom. The second area that we're working in, we're hoping to launch our tender for a call for independent power producers to supply the city with renewable energy. And these projects should be located within the city's grid. And we're hoping to secure about 200 megawatts from that process. The third process is a larger scale renewable. So while those projects are maximum 20 megawatts, but on average about 10 megawatts, we're hoping through a larger scale IPP program to secure about 300 to 500 megawatts from projects located outside of the city that would then be wheeled across the Eskom network and fed into our local distribution network. We're hoping to secure between 300 and 500 megawatts from that program. We're also working on a wheeling framework where a renewable energy generator can transact with a electricity with an off-taker within our grid that would like to use renewable energy and green energy for credits, etc. We also finally, the city was the first city in South Africa to develop a tariff and a policy for small-scale embedded generation. And this enables our citizens, our businesses, and ourselves to put up rooftop PV systems. Currently, the city has about 50 to 80 megawatts of registered grid-tied SECG systems, and we're hoping that this will grow. Obviously, with the increase of the ceiling of that to potentially 10 megawatts under this Schedule 2, as it's called, we would then need to manage those risks and and those opportunities that come with that, because there's lots of potential to add to the scope with our citizens building out their own renewable energy options. Recently, we developed scenarios to assess the cost of supply interventions to meet our 2030 target to offset our city buildings use with renewables in a bid to become net zero carbon by 2030 in our buildings portfolio. We compared business as usual, which is purchasing from Eskom, to scenarios of various combinations where we build our own renewable energy facilities combined with either energy efficiency or purchasing from IPPs or a scaled up SSCG. And the primary outcome is that doing nothing is not an option. All of the interventions compare more favorably to the business as usual scenario, potentially saving the city between 30 and 44% of the base case, which is the Eskom case, over a 30-year period. The best total cost of ownership outcome ended up being the own build with scaled energy efficiency, or closely followed by own build backed up by embedded IPP or SSCG. So aside from the national regulatory requirements that are uncertain, the timeframes that are uncertain in terms of that national regulatory requirements that frame either us building our own generation facilities or procuring from IPPs, there's other constraints like land constraints within the city. The procurement costs in the public sphere is more expensive than the private sector. The extended time frames brought on by compliance requirements for spending public funds is another hurdle. But one of the more significant constraints to achieving this energy transition in any municipality is capacity and skills. A new skill set is required that hasn't been there before. Skills such as renewable energy project development on the legal side of contracts such as PPAs, and then eventually we will need staff for operation and maintenance of these new facilities. Municipalities find it very difficult to compete with the private sector to obtain the skills and then retain those skills. It's a very specialized and highly in demand set of skills that is required to implement what is needed in this transition. Fortunately, the city of Cape Town, as Garrett said, saw this need and the future, and they in mid-2017 set up my department, Sustainable Energy Markets, and made provision for skills and a program to transition to a new energy regime. And we are building those skills, but there are still obviously some gaps. So in addition to building projects, to building capacity, there are a few other areas that we need to prepare for if we are to tackle the city becoming more resilient in this area. A key one is preparing preparing for this change by creating the space for research, for data gathering, for modeling, and basically getting on top of our numbers. We need to do things like cost of, oh my goodness, I'm not even halfway through, Saliem. Okay. We need to get on top of our numbers, start moving to cost reflective tariffs. We need to look at separating out our generation wires and retail functions. We need to engage the customer better so we understand what they need. Customer retention is really the future. We also need to secure skills, tools, and systems for the future. And that means acquiring new software, for example, a new retail platform. We're also investigating additional ancillary services that will build this new model, such as utility scale battery storage and its services. What is the role of the city in a programmatic approach to residential SSCG, battery storage, EV charging, and what is our role in alternative service delivery for informal and new settlements? We're also working with National Treasury to look at whether municipalities can supply surrounding municipalities, or whether we can provide a trading platform. Gearing the grid up for this new paradigm is very important. So investing in engineering, in staff and maintenance of the grid is key. And finally, transitioning to this new energy regime means taking our colleagues along with us in this process of visioning a future. And we have to be conscious about that process to engage for change. We know change is uncomfortable, but it has to happen. So at the end of the day, Saliem, what we want is a customer that is well informed, a city that is resilient, and a network that is resilient. And then, Saliem, I would have liked to have just said in conclusion, we don't have all the answers. We are pioneering, we're learning by doing. Our plans will need to change and respond to science, to respond to what evidence-based research tells us. And we need to also consider what our citizens and our leaders are thinking at the end of the day. Saliem, thank you.
Thank you, Leila. I'm sorry to make you stick to 10 minutes, but you said a lot of stuff, and I think there's going to be a lot of interesting questions afterwards. So hopefully we'll get more opportunity to answer some of the questions. So if I can invite Louise Scholtz from WWF SA. Thanks. Same rules apply, Louise.
Yes, sir. Saliem, you know, I'm always quick. I actually said to Leila, I might have a bit of extra minutes to share. So firstly, thanks, Leila, for taking us through the City of Cape Town's renewable energy strategy. And maybe just to say at this point, I think there is clear consensus that cities, and especially metros in South Africa, being both high emitters and places of innovation to address climate change through decarbonizing their energy systems, have an important role to play in supporting South Africa's NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And I'm very glad that the City of Cape Town, as part of the vertical integration group convened by C40, submitted input to the draft NDCs that are now out for comment. However, I do find it interesting that when we talk electricity or energy systems, and perhaps it's understandably that we inevitably start with the technology, which arguably is the easier part of the discussion. It also tends to limit our conversations to issue of performance, cost, and feasibility, also important, but rather than starting with a more outcomes-based approach, focusing on the systems that we would like to see. And this need for energy system thinking is emphasized in the latest edition of the World Economic Forum 2021 publication, Fostering Effective Energy Transition. And the publication uses the concept of an energy triangle to depict the system imperatives of performance that provides an assessment of a country, and here I would say cities, energy system performance. And they use three key priorities: the ability to support economic development and growth, universal access to secure and reliable energy supply, and environmental sustainability across the energy value chain. And then the objectives of energy transition in a country, and here I want to transpose cities, should then be to simultaneously deliver across these three priorities, thereby maintaining a balanced energy triangle. And one can already see the challenges that a city like Cape Town will face in bringing about this transition. The report then also lists transition readiness and enabling factors, and these, I think, speak to some of the challenges that Leila has highlighted already: capital investment, regulatory and policy commitment, institutions and governance, infrastructure and innovative business environment, human capital and consumer participation, and then energy system and structure. And of course, some of these challenges lie beyond the control of cities, but I think the trick for cities would be to think where the levers for change are, and maybe just really very initial thinking. It would be about building coalitions with the private sector. It would be engaging with prosumers, I think, very importantly, to build an increased understanding of their contribution to overall system resilience, rather than the me first, rest of the city last mentality that seems prevalent at the moment. And also useful, I think, would be to build support to make the linkages between the rollout of renewable energy and local economic development more explicit. And here perhaps is needed more analysis of the job implications of the various rollout options: own build, procuring, embedded generation, particularly in this regard, opportunities for SMMEs. Then the report identifies three imperatives to increase the resilience of the energy transition. And here they define it as it as a transition that maintains the required rate of progress towards a secure, affordable, sustainable and inclusive energy system, speaking to what Saliem said in the introduction, even in the face of disruptions. And I think what the highlight is probably clear to us as well. It's the first thing is to deliver a just transition for all, to ensure equity issues are addressed, a challenge for a city like Cape Town, and to ensure broad stakeholder buy-in, which is seen as a prerequisite for resilience. And this will require an inclusive approach to evaluating energy policy and of course, investment decisions. The next is more technology orientated, and this is around accelerate electrification and go beyond. So increase electrification, the scaling up of renewable energy, the need to invest in R&D, and then of course, unlocking the potential of new forms of energy such as green hydrogen, all the way to digitally enabled demand optimization. And lastly, the finance imperative, and their focus is very much on unlocking private sector finance, not always difficult in a South African context, given our procurement regime that Leila has already referred to, and limits on the amount of debt that cities can take on. But in their view is that you would need this public-private sector collaboration to diffuse the risk as these solutions mature, and to attract diversified and resilient sources of capital that's needed for these multi-year and multi-decade investments into energy systems. So I thought it would be interesting just to quickly go back to what Leila shared with us. And I would argue that the city probably fares relatively well on embracing the technology-focused imperative, could probably be even more innovative on, accessing finance for new infrastructure, particularly impact investment opportunities. And I'll return to that briefly at the end. But I think the real rub for a city like Cape Town is ensuring equitable outcomes. And I think what I'm going to say to people are not new, but it is essentially the question becomes how to ensure affordable energy access for all in a context we have increasing investment in rooftop PV by high and middle income households, coupled with high levels of informality on the other side. And I mean, we all know rooftop PV installations, while greening the grid, comes at a cost to municipalities. There's reduced revenue, there's technical issues relating to grid infrastructure maintenance and strengthening of the grid to manage variability that's introduced by the feeding of RE, and all of these have financial implications. And in addition, research that's been done by WWF and the Center for Renewable Energy Studies, and my colleague Karin is on the call today from the center, shows that the biggest deterrent to household investment in rooftop PV is the upfront capital cost of the technology, while the biggest driver is increasing electricity prices and familiarity with the technology. In other words, if your neighbors and friends already have systems. And this presents with a perfect storm in the future, with ever more affordable rooftop technologies driving increased household investment, coupled with cheaper battery storage options and eventual grid defections. And managing this through appropriate tariff setting and communication with prosumers about their invaluable contribution to the overall resilience of the city will be critical to ensure that grid defections are contained. And then on the other hand, a future of increased informality, given that there's nationally been a step away from providing subsidized housing, coupled with ongoing immigration. And of course, this presents the city with a double whammy: more demand for services, but no commensurate inflow to the city fiscus. And this is in a context where the city's own research shows that the existing free basic allocation is insufficient to provide an adequate level of electricity to low-income households. And whilst increasing this level of subsidization would be the easiest option and provides co-benefits related to better health outcomes and reduced fire risks, amongst others, this does not seem likely given the constrained fiscus. And moreover, increasing this subsidy will not lead to an equitable outcome, as it will only favor poor households that are grid connected, something which came out very strongly in modeling done by the International Institute for Sustainable Development as part of an ongoing WWF city-focused project, not City of Cape Town specific, aimed at strengthening collaboration between cities and the private sector. Here, I think there's potential work, as highlighted already, relating to linking entrepreneurial opportunities to energy services and informal settlements, rolling out something similar to the ice shack model, but at a much more ambitious scale, looking at potential impact investment models, tapping into local debt markets, and using different blending models and expanding carbon credit schemes to see how this infrastructure can be supported in some way. And I'm finished, Saliem, as you can see, under 10 minutes.
Thank you. Are you done? Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Can I invite Karin Kritzinger from the Center for Renewable Energy? Karin, 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, good day. Yes. Hi. So I'm Karin Kritzinger, and thank you, Leila and Louise, for your interesting and succinct presentations. I think it was very well prepared and to the point. Sorry, I'm on my phone and it keeps on slipping because my computer decided to restart this morning. So yes, my presentation is much more messy because I think this whole area of resilience and renewable energy and cities, it is a very messy arena for us to look at. And I think if there's one thing that COVID actually taught us, that it is that we actually just don't know. If I think back at myself, what my idea was, how I predicted the R value, and when it's doubling, a year ago we thought we knew, and this morning I read there are 2,000 new COVID patients in South Africa, and I'm thinking, okay, is that a lot? Is that a, you have to look. So there's so much uncertainty and so much we don't know. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And I think we make a mistake when we say, oh, this is how it is and this is how it should go. So yes, congratulations, Leila, for all the fabulous plans that City of Cape Town are making. Especially on the evidence-based research that you're planning and doing, and data. We only know what we measure. We only know what we know. But and once we have the data, we can start making sense of it all, and we can start seeing patterns. But data is also difficult. The more data you have, you can also jump to incorrect conclusions or not see it. And one of the things is also, that let's call it the elephant in the Zoom. Is that if you speak specifically about rooftop PV, you mentioned the registered systems, and yes, you have the data on the registered systems, but the unregistered systems is very much a problem, and it's quite a sensitive problem because City of Cape Town also doesn't like to be on the front page of the Sunday paper, going against people who are all good and wonderful and fantastic because they're assisting the entire country in putting this renewable energy on their roofs. Whereas, through our research, we've mostly seen this is just for private money saving reasons and not really, and then it's just bragged about that it is very green. So yes, maybe if we just take a step back and we think, what is local government? What is government in general? Government is what it's for us to do together what we can't do alone. And I think energy is very much that. It's more difficult to do anything alone, and definitely more greener. People talk of but off grid and sort of independence of the grid and all of these things, sort of generally in the area of this is green. It's green to be independent. It's green to be sort of off grid, whereas usually it isn't. If you look at all the international modeling that's being done on 100% carbon free, renewable, whatever, the one thing that all of them include is a very strong growth, especially in electricity, electricity demand, and that is usually an energy switch. Some of it is also an extra demand that they're putting in, but it's definitely a switch from from your gas system or from your from other fuels, typically for your house, heating in the house or your water heating, etc. And I think we need to rethink this in a South African context where we do have a lower energy demand, just because of our better temperatures, but also because we just don't have the buying power for all of this excess electricity that would, that would theoretically come in the grid in specific times where we might not need it, And yes, I know everybody always says, oh, then you just plonk up a lot of energy storage, but I'm not 100% convinced that the technology is already there, especially to evacuate it from all these theoretically distributed areas. The other thing that I also think that we need to just, like what are we saying with what we are saying, is this whole privatization drive, putting things in private hands where we're saying, oh, because it's more efficient and it's cheaper and we're going to save so much money, which is a bit contradictory, because actually, private is all about profit and government is all about, you do not make a profit, you just, allocate it, and it would be done in a more fair way for, and as Louise pointed out, equitable. We need to think about equity, and we need to think about how we bring these, privately owned entities in, and whether it really does make sense in the long term, what we're going to put into private hands and what we're going to put into to government hands, and who are the, so that even if you look at the customers who go, sort of like who install these systems, they are the people with, as Louise rightly pointed out, the people who have the access to the capital. So they are the people who have the money, and and they're also speaking with a voice of privilege and a voice of often a voice of power, and it's a very loud voice, and to sort of like then it's sort of guised in the idea of being really green and wonderful and saving the earth, but we need to, Louise, you're not muted, but it's sort of irritating me. Yeah, thank you, Louise. So yeah, so yes. The other thing that I also think that we often sort of don't keep in mind when we have all of these discussions about resilience and cities and more sort of like on the energy system, we love to bash Eskom. We love also, and not as, I mean, it's a favorite pastime of South Africans to actually bash Eskom, but they're so easy to bash, but also municipalities, and we do that in the context of them, they don't know what they're doing. They don't, it's very easy to criticize like that. But actually, if you talk about Eskom and cities and metros, they us, local government is what we do together if we can't do it ourselves, and Eskom is government owned. We actually have a lot of influence in how all of that plays out. I mean, I know that the changes in all of these systems happen very slowly. It happens fast in the private sector. It can adjust incredibly quickly, but it is because it is only about own what's in it for me, and the government and also Eskom need to look at all the different sectors and all the different, kind of work out what is equitable, what are the influences, take the responsibility for all of that. And we have an influence in that, maybe it won't change as fast as in the private sector, but maybe it will change more for the better good. And we will be able to, to do that. And, I mean, 20 years or 30 years or maybe, however long it takes, but have a more resilient system for the whole of South Africa and the world. And I can end here. I can still carry on for half an hour as well, but I'll end.
Oh, please don't. We'll get a chance afterwards. Thank you.
I know you'll carry on as long as you want to, Saliem. There's no moderator
Bruce,
for the moderator.
Bruce, can I invite you? Thank you. Karin. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, and hello to everyone. So I'm going to shift the thinking slightly here. So where we're sitting in the discussion around embedded generation and IPPs and renewables coming into the grid. So this was a very big topic in the future of municipalities when we were talking about it in 2015. And I sort of almost throw the pigeon among the cats and argue that reality is with us already. We're well past the point of grid price parity for rooftop PV, especially on the larger roofs. We're already in a stage where you can see that the municipal business of selling electrons is not really viable anymore. And we're seeing the impacts of that coming on. So in the spirit of future casting and looking forward, to me, the really interesting aspect of what's coming forward can be seen if we look in South Africa's current resource plan. So when we were talking about what needs to happen in the future in 2015, the resource plan still was not updated since 2010. There were thoughts about it, but South Africa was still building Medupi and Kusile, still very much on a coal future and hadn't shifted. If we look at where our resource plan at the moment is heading, it's building almost entirely renewable energy sources. So that's a very good sign moving into the future, but it also gives some strong signals to municipalities and metros as to where the future of South Africa's energy is headed. And what we're going to see from that is the new energy coming online, assuming we manage to roll out the IRP as planned, which I think is likely based on the movement we've seen so far. It means that the energy that we're procuring is no longer going to be more and more expenses every year, and not based on very large long-term capital infrastructure projects. The infrastructure payoff time of a renewable energy plant is much shorter, and the first plants we put online are going to start reaching end of life, which means that they'll have paid themselves off. So over time, we're going to see that this trend that we've had for the last 5 to 10 years of consistently rising energy prices and energy being the most expensive, getting more and more expensive, and that being the major challenge, is going to start over time shifting. And what we're going to see is that it's not just energy that's difficult, it's really the grid services, the availability of the grid, and the ability to make sure we've balanced the grid and that we're balancing the variability in the grid and managing the grid. These services are going to be what becomes more and more expensive and more difficult. So that gives a nice insight as to where the city's role can really take place. And Leila's mentioned a couple of the mechanisms the city has started putting in place to get in there and to start making that a reality. Some of the ones that hopefully we'll be seeing come into play very soon is structures like wheeling. And I think this approach from the city is something that going forward into the future is going to reap strong benefits and rewards. There is a level of ability for municipalities to assist in the government procurement of larger scale renewable energy. But there are limited advantages to it being specifically the city as opposed to a national buyer. What really does help is the city's thinking around how it becomes a grid service provider. And that's going to open up markets where we're looking at electric vehicles or hydrogen powered vehicles that are running on fuel cells, and the creation of hydrogen through electricity is potentially an option. We have different types of demand response that we're going to see coming online, different types of customer behavior. We're going to see customers responding to different tariff signals as the grid evolves and as the different tariff structures that start getting explored by municipalities come into place. So I think it puts us in a very exciting future where the city's role is more and more going to be around driving a business that provides services, and you can call it a business because that's how it's sort of currently structured in the city, but really it's changing the types of service that are provided, right? So it's no longer a service of we will resell electrons from Eskom. It's going to move more and more into a service of we will make sure that you have the energy supply and access to purchase energy over time. And there's a lot of talk around alternate service delivery and how you can make equitable systems work in that space. And I think that technology is going to, over time, catch up with the ideas and thoughts of these systems. And we're going to see a space where alternate service delivery type systems are going to become more and more viable and require less and less subsidy. So the pilots we've been rolling out have shown very good uptake of these types of systems and services. There is a lot of challenges in that space. It's not an easy space to move forward, but I think the city's role in that space is going to be something that's very exciting in the future as well. And the last bit I think is going to be really important for the city to get right as we move forward is the impact of carbon taxes and tariffs across the world, especially with the European Union moving towards their new green system, placing tariffs on carbon products with high carbon footprints. The ability of cities to offer their residents and businesses cleaner energy or access to cleaner energy, or an ability to show that they have no carbon footprint through systems like banking of wheeled energy, is going to become more and more important for the city's citizens. So I think that's something we're going to see as a very interesting space in terms of, and the city's tariffs already leaning towards some of the thinking that's gone into that space with a tariff that allows you to keep the green credits for energy wheeled into the grid. So yeah, I think that's where the most exciting opportunities, if we look further into the future, are for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. You look like you're in a helicopter or something, but can I invite the speakers, and including Gareth, if you want, to just put their cameras on. And then I just want to summarize a few points that each of the speakers made, which I thought they shared a very diverse and rich views. There are one or two points that I think may be of relevance where there might not be total agreement. But just a couple of points, just to set the tone for the discussion, and the speakers could respond to them. And then I would also like the audience members to put up their hand. And I think, Sylvan, you've got some team members there who are sort of monitoring any request to ask a question or speak. But I thought I'll pick up a couple of things. I think there's a very definite need to think about future electricity costs and system costs. And I think Louise mentioned this, and sort of Karin has also raised this. And it's not clear that cheaper least cost technologies will deliver an overall systems cost that is cheaper to the consumer, because there are lots of other factors that go into driving costs of the system. So I'm always, a bit skeptical when people say, we can get you cheap renewables, but then I ask, okay, but what's the tariff going to look like for the consumer at the end of this story? And often those benefits of cheaper technology, generation technologies, they don't often get transferred to the consumer, which then leaves you with a dilemma of still further possible disruptions through defection and potentially other problems in having to manage this disruption. So I think this paradox of cheaper technology versus systems costs and continued cycle of defection, because if people did self-generate, they might still be able to beat the overall systems cost in a competitive way. So that's, I think, Leila, if you could talk to that, and maybe Louise and Karin and Bruce as well. So I just want to understand how that paradox will be resolved. The other question I have is the power of the city to manage its own transition, because you are stuck with a national framework. And the minister did pass a gazette in October to allow municipalities to procure from IPPs, but there's a whole lot of rules that govern it. You have to actually develop a business plan, and the minister has to tick off that it adheres to the IRP. So I just want to, maybe if you could speak to what the status is. And then I think fundamentally in the long run, Gareth, maybe this is more relevant for you, is resilience doesn't necessarily mean about the distribution and the flexibility of the power system, but in this case of the city, it's also about fiscal resilience, the ability to be able to have the fiscal space to be able to continue to not only manage generation capital costs, but also other infrastructure costs, because the demand for energy is going to grow, and there are lots of people that need to be serviced. And what kind of fiscal space and room do you have, and resilience do you have to manage this, plus other complex other things that the city is doing? And there's been a consistent question on the chat about the cost of electricity inequality of access and this balancing act that the city has. And as the national situation, if it doesn't improve in terms of growth and so on, the burden on the city is going to grow. Then I think, Leila, you talked about sort of three things in terms of how you're going to manage the diversification of your energy security. I still feel that a lot of what you're talking about is diversification of energy security, but not really resilience in the way I understand it. But maybe I'm not very clever, so I don't fully appreciate the deeper meaning of resilience. But clearly the reliance on one monopoly, which is Eskom, is effectively what we are busy seeing an attempt to break away from. And the role of the city is very important. The city's own procurement, the timeframes for when you think that will happen. And then this huge potential for self-generation, which if we get the 10 megawatt and beyond, you could see up to 5, maybe 7 gigawatts of embedded generation nationally. So I'd be curious to know what share the city can see happening. And then, of course, in the last resort, we have Car Power with a 20-year contract, which can supply gas power to all of us at very high cost. So if I can leave you with those, Leila, do you want to respond? And maybe I can ask others. Thanks.
There were many questions there, Saliem. I'm not sure which one you want me to respond to first.
No, I think more around the city and its procurement stuff and the systems cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're right. The diversification of our sources is one component of becoming more resilient. I've mentioned some of the other avenues that we would need to tackle. For example, there's a huge issue of, by 2030, the city is going to be, 50% of the city is going to be informal. And that's a very different profile to what we have today. So subsidies could double by then, but the revenue base will halve. It is a conundrum. It's one of those really difficult questions that we need to tackle. We know that our growth is declining at 2% a year, we need to seek new customers. The electrification of the transport sector is one of those. We also have to accept that our demand and our revenue base is going to shrink. We need to be able to work within a shrinked revenue base. We also have to remember that all municipalities depend on the electricity revenue for other services within the city, within the municipalities. And we have to maybe rethink that model as well. So I said at the end of my talk that there's no easy answers for these. These are things that we need to learn. We need to do the research to understand the scale of these issues. You asked about the process with national government. So the 16th of October regulations requested municipalities to have a certain process in place to be able to secure determination from the minister. We feel that we're quite confident that we are well underway with that process, but we don't know what the response from national government will be because it's new for them. It's new for us, it's new for them. For example, they've asked us, they've said municipalities need to have their renewable energy targets or projects within their IDP. We've had it in our IDP for many years now, so that's a tick. We are developing feasibility studies that would need to be submitted to the DMRE in order to get the determination. It's not clear from national government what that feasibility study should contain or look like. We're doing it very differently to Ekurhuleni, for example, and I think it would be in the best interest of DMRE to give some guidance of what they would require in such a a process. We're also developing a PPA and the many different agreements that would be required for the kickoff of our auction, our tender that will go into the market at the end of July of this year. Again, it's very new for the city. We need to understand what the risks are for a municipality and how to apportion the risks to the private sector and to ourselves. Again, I think it would have been in the best interest of the country and the national government to provide a template PPA that municipalities could work off. We would be requesting 2 different determinations, one for our own generation plant in Atlantis. That's the other thing national government have said, you need to request a determination for a specific project or program. You cannot just ask for 600 megawatts based on what you will replace Eskom purchases by. You would need to base it on very specific programs where you have gone to market and received quotes or evidence for this feasibility study. As I mentioned, procurement processes within a local government sphere are quite restricted. So we need to think innovatively about how to manage that sort of process. I'm just looking at the other questions. The system, no, I don't. Saliem, you would need to remind me of the other questions.
No, I just wanted to also ask you, there are lots of questions about inequality of access and the cost of electricity.
Yes.
And
yes.
there's also been one other point I forgot to mention, the debate between private and public procurement, but you said the city also wants to own its own generation. So
yes.
maybe just quickly on that.
Okay.
And then I want to give the other panelists an opportunity.
Okay. The ability of poor households to pay remains the biggest challenge in electricity across the developing world. It's not new to Cape Town or unique to Cape Town. We have 90% connection rate, almost 98% electricity connection rate. But as Louise said, we have in our research seen that some of our citizens are unable to afford electricity after the second week or within the second week of the month. Right now we're doing a number of investigations to see what the role of the city could be to reduce energy poverty. There are restrictions and fiscal restrictions, so regulatory and fiscal restrictions of what we can actually do. But this doesn't take away from the fact that we need to find some sort of solution that is workable. So we haven't given up. We are looking for solutions. The biggest issue is going to be that issue of how we subsidize going into the future. What is the role of the city in subsidizing those that cannot afford the energy services to live a healthy life? As you said, and it's going to get worse. Like Bruce said, we're investigating alternative forms of electricity services, but we also want to provide our citizens with a high quality service. So there's that balancing act as well. Mini grids can't do everything, or solar home systems can't do everything that a household would want. And then again, communication and building understanding within our communities around this issue becomes important. Electricity prices, if worked off, as you said, technology costs will come down, but we do not know how Eskom is going to respond to municipalities and others going more off-grid. They're going to be the supply of last resort. They're going to cost for that. They're going to put up their prices to accommodate those changes that will come. So the overall system costs is likely to remain the same. And maybe decrease slightly. But again, it is something that we need to monitor, we need to investigate, and then we need to plan for. Thank you, Saliem.
Thanks, Leila. Louise?
Yes, Leila, my sympathy. I actually don't know how you're going to address this this issue of energy inequality and this fiscal cliff that you're looking at. And maybe just some thinking and what I've raised in my input already. I do think there needs to be a paradigm shift. Clearly, we can't continue the way we've done up to now, looking at how we provide energy services to poor households. I don't know whether the iShack model is something that can be replicated. I think the benefit of following that kind of model is that you really engage your consumers, the consumers of those alternative energy services in the process. I think it also provides job opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities within those communities, because failing that, it's not clear to me where the money is going to come from to actually do the electrification. And secondly, I do think there's a discussion that needs to happen across the city. We live in different cities, and perhaps there is an opportunity to unlock some money from your high income users in some way or other, if they have a better understanding of the overall system. And I think this is a constant debate that Karin and I have. It's wealthy people putting up their own systems, not understanding how the system works, not knowing that the cost of that electricity connection to their households. And we need collectively as a city to foster an understanding of the importance of the overall resilience of the energy system to the overall resilience of the city. And it's as if people are not making that connection. But really, this is a big elephant, and I don't know where you're going to start eating it. The ears or the tail, I don't know. And Karin, I'm sure you can have your share of the cake.
Yeah, Karin, you've done a lot of work on this kind of stuff. So maybe if you want to share some of that, I think your PhD's on this. So if I can give the floor to you.
Yeah, my alleged PhD. Yeah. So okay, yeah. So some points on what was raised. I think one of the things is, you know, this whole point about deflection, and this you can see in the scale of the city deflecting from Eskom, or you can see it in the scale of the individual, the customer deflecting from the city in their areas. You know, I mean, it's not a problem when it's something like your 50 megawatt or whatever in Atlantis. You know, that's a very small percentage, and it doesn't really bring in financial or technical problems. It's when it becomes, you know, when it goes up to 30%, 50%, 80%, you know, when you actually need the system much more. And I think we need to, you know, from the get-go, start thinking about how it's going to affect the system when everybody does it. And you know, and that is the same for you and your neighbors, or you and your neighboring municipalities. So yes, you know, you think about the city of Cape Town. What is the first thing you need? You need to be in good standing, and you need to have all of your other ducks in the row to be able to buy from the IPPs, you know, to not have it to go through a national process, but a regional process. And just like, you know, like it's going to be the rich people and the money flush companies who put take advantage of the cheaper energy of these renewables. It's also going to be the richer municipalities, and that of course can change a lot over time, you know. So it's you know, if you talk from the position of privilege and power, you speak in a different voice from when maybe you are a municipality, not from your own what you've done, not being in good standing, and actually not having enough paying customers to handle your grid well, and not being able to take advantage of the IPPs, you know, buying directly from the IPPs either, and you know, being in a total different position. That was the one thing. The other thing that I just want to I mean, I know this is quite a bugbear of mine, but just to emphasize as well, it's a difference between tariffs and cost, you know, sort of like, and I think we need to start thinking much more about the cost, you know, because then you also see it from the whole system point of view, and how will Eskom change their tariffs towards the city of Cape Town when there's more own generation, exactly in the same way that how would city of Cape Town change their tariffs towards their customers, you know. It's the same sums that you make, because you know, a tariff is just a way to recover your costs. It's not the actual cost, you know. It's not I mean, it's related in some way. And the same with wheeling, you know, sort of like, you know, there's going to be a lot of wheeling within the city of Cape Town grid, but there will also be, you know, if we really take these buying from IPPs seriously, which would be kind of just very much transactional for municipalities. If you want to, you know, if you want to do it, you would have to have it in areas that are probably outside of the area of the municipal grid, and there would be wheeling through the Eskom system. And how is Eskom going to cost that wheeling? In the same way that the city is thinking, how are they going to cost the wheeling within you know, within their grid? And then there's just another point which I think we often ignore, is that large areas of the city of Cape Town grid, you know, especially in a lot of the informal areas, are actually not on the city of Cape Town distribution area. It's actually in a Eskom distribution area. You know, typically a lot of the lower income areas, actually the municipalities did not want to take over the electrification there, and it was done by Eskom, you know. So how do you, you know, equitably do that, you know, for some municipalities that have vast low income areas and other municipalities not? And would it then in the end be only the municipalities that have only high income, high paying customers that are able to go for these IPPs?
Thank you. Tindu, if I can ask you to just put your mic off, please. Bruce, if I can invite you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the discussion on IPPs to me is an interesting one. It's often being seen as all cities can get power for cheaper. The reality of the city procuring power from IPPs is that its primary advantage is in removing the burden on the sovereign guarantees. So the real reason that a municipality or the city would want to be driving this market is to enable the country to have more renewable energy on a utility scale coming online by relieving how much pressure gets put onto that national sovereign debt of the current reprocess. So that was the primary driver behind the city's case when looking at procuring from IPPs, when they're arguing to DMRE why this makes sense. Right from day one, that was sort of one of the key arguments that made it really valuable. So especially when you look at the impact of long-term purchasing of municipalities, you really have to be able to continually procure power to be able to keep up with the decreasing technology costs. So if you want to work in be playing in the energy generation space, as prices of new technology decrease, you have to continue to purchase the cheapest, most up-to-date power and increase your power base to be able to compete with what the national grid is going to be doing. So if Eskom is buying cheaper renewables every year and the city buys power once, and then in 10 years' time, they still only have that one generator, that one generator is going to be the most expensive power that the city buys, because it's not going to have been mixed in with all of the newer power. It's not going to hit the advantages of that you're seeing in the national system. So that's one of the interesting points that I think is often missed. And to the same extent, I mean, there's a lot of discussion around wheeling, and the reality for the city is that there is almost no difference in terms of the city's financial space for it purchasing from an IPP or at allowing wheeling. So the reality is where the city's tariffs are headed and how the future tariffs are being structured, and the thinking that goes into the city's business model is taking out that reliance on energy sales and energy income as a form of revenue. And I think that resolves a lot of these problems around tariffs and costs. But what is really interesting to me is how we make sure that we get the lowest cost of energy onto the grid in terms of the amount of capital pouring into energy generation. So while you need new build energy to make sure there's enough power for the economy, in an economic and GDP purpose, the more capital we divert into the energy sector, the bigger impact that it has on our GDP. So capital into the energy sector it's inefficient. So if you have to pay 10% more for GDP, and this is results coming out of a UCT study that is not completed yet, so it can't be published, but it's showing that if you increase the cost of capital, or the cost of the capital intensity, that's the better word for it. If you increase the capital intensity in the energy space, you have a massive knock-on effect to your whole economy. So to me, the arguments around systems costs and making sure that we get the best outcome for the economy as a whole is really around making sure that we're purchasing power that requires the least amount of capital. All of the risk costs and other tariff things have a negative impact, and how the cities and municipalities will have to recover money. But ultimately, in order for the economy to grow, we need to be minimizing the amount of capital spent on the same energy generation. There are some benefits to localization, and so there's a trade-off between capital spent in the energy sector when you can get localized manufacture in place. So obviously the localized manufacturer has a good role to play, and the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan is exploring that, and we're pushing that direction. But when you talk about private sector generation, to me, the key is making sure that the business cases for people putting power on their roof is based more on the ability to procure efficiently than someone being able to save money because they're in some way subsidized, or they're removing their ability to pay rates and streetlight subsidy. And the city of Cape Town has done well in that direction already. I know there are some people within the city that are frustrated about the ability to change that, because there's obviously pushback from communities and from the political space when you try and change the tariff too much. But the general direction that the city's tariffs have been heading are moving in the right space to resolve these issues.
Thank you very much. Gareth, if I can ask you to reflect on some of the stuff that's been said from where you sit.
Thank you very much, Saliem. Maybe let me just take a bigger picture than energy. A lot has been said around energy as well. So indeed, there is significant fiscal pressure, as has been noted, and the COVID pandemic has made what was already a very difficult situation, which was trending in a negative, a lot worse. And so the city, the city is looking at what many people are calling recovery, but from my point of view, recovery in its fullest sense still seems, a long way away, because this pandemic hasn't ended, and how it will end is not clear, and there are lots of variables that we're still playing with. New variants, new peaks, and the pace of vaccine rollout all have a lot to determine how this may end. And indeed, we may cycle through the pandemic for many, many years to come still. And the reason I raise that, of course, is because there are ongoing economic impacts from that, and all of it feeds into the fiscal sustainability of the city, but also it feeds into the general public finance sustainability as well. So, the city has already seen in the last several months, which will play out more acutely in the period going forward, that there are decrease in a number of grants coming from national government and provincial government, and all of these phenomenon further increase the pressure on creating a balanced municipal budget on an annual basis. So, of course, the city uses its available information for the purposes of developing a budget. It makes new assumptions based on the best available information, and a new municipal budget is about to be passed at the end of May, and we'll have a greater sense, of course, of what that will look like now over the next 3 years. But we don't know where the economy will be going, and as much as many economists are presenting a sort of 2 to 3% growth over the next few years, we have seen that many growth forecasts in recent times have been overly optimistic. But the one point, the best I should say on that, of course, is we monitor that acutely, and we have an obligation to pass a balanced budget in law each year, and the city itself is obviously trying to prioritize service delivery by taking a lot of very hard decisions internally as well around staffing and all of those kinds of things. It's really a very hard environment to work in, but we have to take some of the pain, like the whole of society is taking pain during this time as well. But the point I wanted to just raise is a piece of work that we're working on at the moment, which looks at broader capital infrastructure resilience going forward over the next 10-year plus period. So along with next year's IDP will be 10 sector plans, which will be approved. One of them happens to be energy, but there's water and IS&T and environment and all of that, which will create and sort of give line of sight to a 10-year plus capital investment program across all of what we're calling the sectors. Now, what's interesting about that is, we can't fund everything in 1 year. We can't fund everything, obviously, in 5 years. But we are now creating the mechanism to improve the ability to make choice across those different sectors. A lot of that, needs to be run through a resilience lens. So what are the great risks that are emerging now and in the future. And so a piece of work that I've been working on with a number of colleagues as well is to develop our ability to assess the resilience of a project and the resilience through a project. So when we say resilience of a project, it is the ability of that project, both during execution and in commissioning, to withstand plausible shock events. So whether it be, you know, flooding or supply chain collapse or infrastructure failure, you know, these are project managers have to make the right choices around what those are. So the resilience of a project is one component, and then the resilience through the project. So project managers are obviously quite used to understanding what the key benefit of a project is. And so resilience offers a really good opportunity to work out what the co-benefits of a project are. And so, you know, we need to get to a point now when our project managers, and I've done some early methodology on this, which I think has a good chance of being integrated as early as this year, is working out what the resilience through the project is. So the resilience through the project would be those additional co-benefits of building the strength of a home or a community or the city at large. Now, this will have to go on a maturity journey, because ultimately what we are getting to, which we're probably still a couple years away from, is really good CVAs or cost benefit analyses for each of the large capital projects. You know, you would think that this happens, you know, all the time. It happens less than people would think. So once we kind of improve those kinds of data points for individual projects, we will be in a much better position in a few years' time to make better choices across portfolios, where we're able to actually say this needs to be advanced now, or we need to take projects from the future and bring them now forward, or we need to reschedule projects now into the future. And so using resilience lens is going to be very, very important, because it's going to bring risk, both risk being addressed and risk which is not being addressed. So for example, to move more broadly, you know, we're investing, as everyone would know, heavily into water augmentation projects over the next 7 years. And that's because we have memory, we have recency around the day zero drought. Now, of course, there are good reasons why we must invest. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't, we definitely must invest. But it's an area, obviously, which can be significantly advanced because of the recency of the day zero drought event. There are a lot of other plausible shock events, and the one that I think about most acutely is, for example, the prospect of large storm surge across the Cape Town coast. We have a 307-kilometer coast, and large storm surge events do happen occasionally. And, you know, the mother of all storm surge events is plausibly in our future. Could be next week, and could be next year, it could be in 20 years' time. And so we need to keep certain risks which are plausible in the minds of our decision makers, so that when people make capital decisions, choosing one thing over another, or part of a portfolio over another, we also are constantly reminding ourselves about what we're not investing in, so that over the period of time, we actually should be investing in everything. So that's a piece of work I'm involved in. You know, it will impact obviously the energy space, but most importantly, it's a mechanism to try and build broader resilience of our projects to directly climate impacts and improving the benefits of those projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Gareth. We've running out of time. Actually, we've got just 5 minutes for sort of commentary. There's been a few questions. I don't think all those questions can be answered, but there was a curious one about a long-term lease for every poor indigent RDP household that can be given a solar panel with a refit connection. Jody Alamayas asked this question. And then there's what's happening with the New Horizon waste to biogas project in Athlone. How is the city planning to develop electricity infrastructure for electrified transportation? And quite a lot of questions from Kevin, but I would suggest that maybe Kevin takes this up with you, Leila, related to you. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. So just maybe Leila, if one or two others can quickly give some summary comments. And we've got to end at 25 past, then I'll hand over to Silver.
Perhaps we should take Jodi's question. I'm not actually asked Karin to maybe respond first because her and Louise's work around, their recent work deals with some of this. Maybe just to say, solar home systems are great, but when there's no sun, there is an issue if there's no backup. And then the ISHAC approach for solar home systems, they still require a subsidy from municipalities. So we don't get away from that fiscal issue that we spoke about earlier. Karin?
Karin?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound, the problem often is that if you as soon as you're critical about anything renewable, you become the anti-renewable person. But there is this illusion that we're just going to give this cheap solar to the indigent people because it's so wonderful, it's green and it's cheap. So we need to understand that solar PV is only cheap as energy, and you can't do much with energy. You need the capacity as well. It's like, I think the only thing that can really operate just on the energy are these old solar powered calculators, that if it's had a little power and it goes in and out, people talk about things like solar lights, why do you need a light when the sun is shining? It's a battery operated light. So it's a bigger system. And the thing is, these things don't really scale well. They're very cheap if there's a high capacity factor, if there's a lot of sun, and it's large scale. It can be put up in a sort of in a green field. You're not working with the slant of the roof. You're not working with a whole lot of tiny inverters, a whole lot of tiny PV panels, replicating. It's expensive in the installation, it's expensive in the technology, it's expensive in all ways. And it actually doesn't really offer much. It offers you, you can't plug a kettle into that, you can't plug a 2-point sort of like one of these electrical stoves into that, and then you're offering a solution of what? It's much cheaper to actually just bring the distribution area out there. You need to think very well, sort of why is it that you're not doing there? The ISHAC was done with a very large grant money, and Stellenbosch municipality also at some point, I think, I don't know if it actually went through or they were just thinking about it, also it took the free basic electricity in there. And the reason why it was there was the Stellenbosch municipality had a very strong policy of not electrifying that area because it was actually on land that is protected.
Karin, can I ask you to
natural.
please conclude?
Yeah, no, it was very specific, and what are they doing? They're now electrifying it because it is cheaper and it is the better option. So we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking something is a good option just because it is it's got renewable or green next to its name.
Okay, Louise and Bruce, maybe just last 30-second comments from both of you. Thanks.
Quickly from my side, and this is a question to the city. I often hear from external parties that the city is very averse to debt, which of course is what one would want to see, and there's of course limits the level of debt that cities can incur. But my question would be, is the city optimizing the opportunities that are out there for blended financing options, looking at short-term debt with long-term pension funds and investment that would be keen and to support sort of projects that have a climate benefit? So maybe just a question to you, and obviously this is a separate discussion. Thank you.
Bruce, thank you.
Yeah, I think, there's certainly a lot of interesting stuff that's being said. I certainly disagree wholeheartedly with Karin's view on alternate service delivery, but I think that's an argument for another time. But I certainly think there's a lot of interesting possibilities for the city and future planning, and it's going to be very interesting to see where the future heads.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank all the speakers. They're really very diverse and really interesting stuff. And just to say that at least we're moving forward, even though there are lots of issues to crack. But I can't see any way of us not having to do that. You have to basically construct the future while you're still stuck in the present. I think it was a famous person who said it, Gramsci, I think. I think that invention of the new future is not going to be easy, given that the old rules still apply. And we're going to have to break out of that to make something happen. And there's no other way in that journey but to battle it, as it were, to tackle the friction is the right word. So if I can give over to, I don't know if it's Solvin or Gareth, last concluding remarks. Thank you.
I'm happy to make just some.
Also, sorry, just to thank the audience for participating.
Selwyn, you may want to make one or two comments, but I just want to thank all of our panelists for their comments. And there was a good deal of robustness in there. And Saliem, thank you for pulling it together. This is a space that you know well, and I really appreciate the way you summed that up. I mean, many of the rules have not changed. And these conversations hopefully do contribute to rule changing, because they create coalitions of change in ways that we may not foresee here today. So thank you as well to the participants and for the engagement in the side panel. A reminder that the Futurecasting series will be an ongoing series, and a number of new topics will be explored at least every quarter going forward. And I'd like to hand back to Selwyn, the partner for this event, to perhaps have the very final word. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Saliem. To echo Gareth's thanks to all the speakers, I think it was very informative. From my side, I think the general perception out there is that the IPPs would be the silver bullet, but it's not. There's other challenges other than technical that will have to be addressed. And I think partnerships is quite critical in addressing these issues and these long-standing challenges that we'll have to see and address in the way municipalities operate itself. So thank you very much for your time, to all the participants as well. Just to let you note that the next Futurecasting session is on the 23rd of June. The focus at the moment will be busy finalizing the focus, but I will be in contact and share the event and the focus of the event with you in due course. So that's on the 23rd of June, same time from 10 to 11:30. Thank you to everybody and for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.